everyone, and welcome to 1337's Wednesday Knowledge Stream. I'm Madde, I'm a software developer here at 1337, and I hope that you are all doing well. I'm doing all right. It is a struggle to work remote and not meet so many people that you're used to meeting, and it's challenging to change your routines and work from home. I was actually talking to a friend the other day, and she asked me, what do you do to keep sane during these times, like when all your routines have changed? And I thought to myself, like, yeah, what do I do? And what I've found is that keeping the same routines is key for me in order to stay sane. So in the morning, I go up the same time that I used to, and I still take a shower, and I still do my makeup and everything. I have a dog, so I walk the dog, and that's so nice to have a reason to go out in the morning and go out in the lunch and after work and everything. And I really enjoy doing other things than just spend time in front of the computer. So I've been starting to bake sourdough breads, actually. So I'm becoming a master in sourdough baking. So it's nice to have some contrast in what you do. I'm a bit curious what you do to keep sane. So if you have any ideas or suggestions for me, then please just write about it in the chat, and maybe I can learn something for you as well. And working in agile teams can be also even more challenging now during these times. I mean, if you work in a waterfall process, you have a quite strict process to fall back on, but we don't really do that strict process in Agile. So it can be even more challenging. So the misconceptions that we have about Agile might be even more true right now. So that's why I'm so happy that we have my colleague, Gresë Konjufca Boltežar here today to bust some common myths about Agile software development. So hi Gresë, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Great to hear. I just need to tell the story about yesterday when I asked Gresë to give me some guidance on how to pronounce her name. And she said to me like, well, it's like saying Grace, but with a Scottish accent. So now every time I think about you, I think about groundskeeper Willie from The Simpsons. But it's a good reminder.
It works sometimes.
Do you have any tips on how to stay sane during these times? Do you do anything special?
Well, the most special thing is that I've started to take the time for myself and meditate. Take deep breaths. Yeah, and basically just do what you said, keep the routine, but also try to remember that after all, we live in the part of the world where we're quite safe. And for those of us who still get to keep their jobs and work with amazing teams, it feels very privileged. So yeah, just keep reminding myself of what great life actually I'm able to have, and keep taking deep breaths, and keep reminding myself that this too shall pass, and having the support from the team that I work with has been an immense help. Yeah,
that's a really good reminder. Being grateful for what you have.
Yeah,
it usually helps to make us feel better.
Yeah.
So I tried to look for some information about you, but you are quite anonymous. No Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter. You're quite anonymous persons. But I figured, like we've done with other speakers, to get the audience to get to know you better, to play two truths and a lie. So the rules are simple. You just tell me two true things about yourself and one lie, and I will guess after your session which one was false.
Right. This was a difficult one, but I think I've nailed it. So I'm doing masters in neuroscience. I was born with 8 toes on 1 leg. And the third one is that I can speak 6 languages.
Oh, wow. Interesting things. I get something to think about here. So for you in the audience, as usual, if you have any questions, please post them in the comment section or in the chat, and I will forward them after the session. But I said it, let's get this started, and I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. So my story starts a few years ago when I switched my career from clothing manufacturing and retail to managing software projects and products. I was bored with what I was doing at that time and started to develop a keen interest in creating valuable products that would solve actual business or user problems through code. I found myself constantly reading about digital product management, learning about principles of software development, and after spending many hours on various online software development courses, I was ready to make the big jump. So I managed to convince one of my previous employers that I had enough transferable skills in managing projects and managing communications and risks, and that whatever I didn't know, I would be able to pick up pretty quickly. And the rest, as they say, is history. And here I am in my first week on the job, and I kept hearing about these 2 things, or hearing of these 2 things that have been following me ever since. And these were actually 2 sentences. One was a sentence where the word agile kept coming up or popping up, like agile software development, and then something in the second part of the sentence. And this was the second one. What I learned very quickly is that what I should never do when hearing this is to take it at face value as an indisputable truth. Because the second thing I also learned pretty quickly is that I should always follow up with more questions and try to understand how come something can work for someone but not work for someone else. So to separate the misunderstandings from the facts. But it took me almost 4 years to understand some of the most common misconceptions about agility in software development or agile software development. And today, I want to share the lessons I've learned over the past year or so since I've joined this amazing company that some of you might have heard of, 1337. And I got to work with some brilliant people on all sides and on an exciting project and product for a large retail company. Looking back, I think that one of the reasons why it took me so long to get it is because prior to this, I was working in environments that conditioned me to look and consider the tiny little details instead of the meaning behind those details and how they connect to the bigger picture. So as I continued my studies in managing organizations and people, they contributed greatly to my understanding of why do we work the way we do and what are the main influences behind the ways we approach work nowadays. If you have studied management or are just interested in the theory behind it, this image might be familiar to you. This person, Frederick Winslow Taylor, has greatly influenced the way society has been approaching work in the past and present century. He was a mechanical engineer who sought to improve industrial efficiency, and he's also considered to be one of the first management consultants. He deemed work deserving of systematic observation and study. Therefore, he laid out his findings on work in his monograph that he called The Principles of Scientific Management. He argued there that the necessity is on focusing on training rather than finding the right man, stating that in the past, the man has been first, but in the future, the system must be first. And the first goal of all good systems should be to develop first-class men. His words, not mine. His scientific management consisted of 4 principles, scientific management theory. One was to replace rule of thumb work methods with methods based on a scientific study of the tasks. 2 was to select, train, and develop each employee rather than passively letting them learn to train themselves. And 3, provide detailed instructions and supervision of each worker in the performance of that worker's task. And 4, divide work nearly equally between managers and workers so that managers can apply scientific management principles to planning the work and the workers actually perform the tasks. And you might find some of these principles familiar because this is how you go on about doing your work. He claimed that the same principles can be applied with equal force to all social activities. And this is what we have been doing ever since. It's known that exact methodologies place more emphasis on the systems and processes rather than on people. And learning about this helped me get a better understanding of the way we work, but I still didn't have all the answers about the key misconceptions in Agile software development, so I kept digging. And as we will see, most of these misunderstandings are rooted in the way people have been used to doing things over the past 100 years. So in the late 50s and 60s, people from various scientific backgrounds in mathematics, physics, and chemistry started writing and creating software for predicting weather, for the military, for prototype computers, as well as software that would eventually help us travel to the moon, or the ones that did. And here we have a popular image of Margaret Hamilton, one of the first software engineers, standing next to listings of the software she and her MIT team produced for the Apollo project. At the time, computer science and software engineering were not yet established disciplines. Instead, programmers learned on the job with hands-on experience. So when she started using the term software engineering during the early Apollo missions, software development was not taken seriously compared to other engineering practices, and it wasn't regarded as science. And she was concerned with legitimizing software development as an engineering discipline. Over time, the term software engineering gained the same respect as any other technical discipline. It was believed that in order to be taken seriously, it was necessary to follow the same processes as other engineering disciplines. That it's necessary to plan out how the software should be built and is going to be built, and who will come up with a structure of what it should look like when it's done. So once you answered all these questions, you handed it over to the programmers who would type everything in, and you would have a perfect software in the end. But after some time of creating software the same way they would produce a building or a mass-produced car, problems started to appear. Scope creep, costs overrunning, underestimation of complexities, delays, non-incremental changes, low user adoption, and many others were the reasons why various organizations had to scrap and cancel huge software projects, despite spending a lot of money and time on trying to produce them. And if you've been in this field for some time, this may sound very, very familiar to you. So naturally, some people who were working on such software at the time started thinking, how could these situations be avoided? Because they understood that process rigor was simply not the recipe for an era in which everything was changing at such a rapid pace. And they started experimenting or with what some of them called lightweight processes. So at the beginning of 2001, representatives from XP, Extreme Programming, Scrum, DSDM, adaptive software development, Crystal methods, feature-driven development, pragmatic programming, and others sympathetic to the need for an alternative to document-driven, rigorous software development processes got together to talk about their similarities and differences that were enabling them to be more successful in delivering valuable software compared to others. And they ended up doing two things. They came up with a name to describe this broad notion of doing software, and they called it Agile. And they wrote this manifesto of what they had in common, which they ended up describing in the form of value statements. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with individuals and interactions and working software and customer collaboration and responding to change. So while they were uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it, they also understood that you need to have a choice when push comes to shove. What are you going to prioritize? Individuals and interactions, or processes and tools, customer collaboration or contract negotiation, responding to change or following a plan. And if we just emphasize the values to the right, we will get good definition of a bureaucratic state. But when we look at them together as a whole, they sort of make sense. This was the first time that these developers or these authors started placing a greater importance on people and interactions between them compared to the old way of thinking, systems first. They also wrote 12 principles of Agile software development that are less read than the value statements, but are a valuable indication of what they agreed on. And they're less read since it takes a bit of scrolling on the page and clicking on the link to navigate to them. But knowing these principles is super important because they provide additional clarity to the value propositions. So Agile software development is based on 12 principles. It recognizes the importance or the significance of process and tools, but it places a greater importance on the interactions of individuals. And since individuals are unique, then processes should be melded to individuals and teams and not the other way around. And here we have principles such as build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and the support they need in order to get their job done, communicate face-to-face, as the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team, and allow for self-organizing teams to emerge because they provide the best architectures, requirements, and designs. In a similar manner, the second value states that while comprehensive documentation is not unacceptable, the primary focus must always remain on the final product, which is that of a working software. And here we find principles such as deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with preference to the shorter time scale. Working software is the primary measure to principle more often than not. And enhance ability through continuous attention to technical excellence and good design. Comprehensive documentation is some form of promise what the software will be like when it's done, as opposed to working software, which is tangible. You can ship it, you can modify it, you can scrap it, but it's always real. Further down, the principles discuss the importance of customer collaboration versus contract negotiation. While the latter is a valuable practice, it's also insufficient because contracts and project charters provide boundaries within which the parties can work, but only through ongoing collaboration with the customers can a development team, understand and deliver what they want. So here we find principles such as highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery. Cross-functional teams, business people, and developers must work together daily throughout the project. And agile processes must promote sustainable development because a constant pace needs to be maintained indefinitely. And then we come to the fourth value statement, which determines the importance of responding to change over following a plan. And to me, this represents the key element of being agile. It recognizes the limits of planning in a changing environment through principles such as welcome changing requirements even late in development, harness change for the customer's competitive advantage, and my favorite, simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. And last but not least, regularly reflect on how to become more effective, then tune and adjust the behavior accordingly. So while not all agile practices may be applicable in all contexts and need to be carefully selected to fit the context of a project or a product, these values for Agile software has had a huge impact on these software development practice in the years that followed. But how come after so many years, there's still a big gap between the Agile software development values and principles and the jumble of things that people associate with it or label as such? One of the answers to this I was able to find in an article by Martin Fowle, one of the co-authors of the manifesto. He calls it semantic diffusion. So as original ideas get passed from one person, organization to another, they get more diffused and more fuzzy. And as a result, many organizations nowadays that do Agile and have been doing it for several years are nothing near to an Agile approach. But why is that so? It's because it involves a deeper, stronger cultural and worldview change. And that's a lot harder to do than most people realize. After all, we have been conditioned to think a certain way about work for so many years. It's impossible to change that with a click in just 20 years, the last 20 years. I was Agile software development that have nothing to do with being Agile and everything to do with something else. One of those is the notion that it's possible to predict software development. And this idea has been around since the start. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have contracts and collaborations indicating fixed price, fixed time, fixed scope agreements. But do you know what I think is possible to predict? This. And I guess this doesn't need much introduction, since many of you probably have it already in your homes. I mean, it takes what, about one of these bookshelves to be sold every 5 seconds somewhere in the world. So this is something that can be predicted. It comes with a clearly defined scope. It has a set height and width. It has adjustable shelves and space between them that you can adapt as you like. It comes with an instruction manual, so you can assemble it by following certain steps. You get all the nuts and bolts and everything that you need to put it together. And once you've done it, you can estimate the time it will take you to build it again. So since it has a fixed scope, it's possible for the producers to calculate the cost. And they've been keeping the retail price, I think, same for at least the past decade. So we have the perfect example of a project management iron triangle. We have the time, the cost, and the scope. But my experience in software development, especially the one that I experienced a year or so, has taught me that the process of developing software is more similar to this example than to the process of assembling a Billy bookshelf. Because solutions to complex problems emerge as you do the work and not just by analyzing and talking about the work. And throughout the process, you usually learn that most of the assumptions were wrong. So we start with a product vision, which communicates the desire this product has, or the desire that the users have for this product, and talks about the target customer and the primary value proposition, as well as the business model behind it. But it doesn't happen overnight. It starts from here. But in order to start from the image on the top left corner and come to the end picture, it is essential to have a clear idea about the bigger picture of what you're working towards and why. And this is something that is usually missed when we try to predict software development. So what I have learned is that software development processes most usually start by setting up the work and the infrastructure, and then building on top incrementally and iteratively to come to the final product. So none of the projects I have worked on so far have looked anything other than step-by-step changes implemented until you come to the end, to the final result. And what I have learned is it's a lot more important to define the most important phases of value for the product and how you know that you achieve the desired value, instead of planning and building lots of assumptions into it. So I realized it's actually not possible to predict software development. And the more you try to do it, yes, it makes you feel in control, but more often than not, you get it wrong. Which leads me to another very debated topic about how Agile is a particular thing you do, and it's a methodology. And I've seen this in many, many places. So what has happened is that the traditional management thinking has conditioned us to consider processes first rather than people. And because of this, most organizations approach the Agile adoption by looking at Agile frameworks and practices, and having the expectation of these being conducive to Agile environments, which by magic would resolve all of their issues. And one of the most common notion or idea that many organizations have is that if they follow one or multiple Agile frameworks, they can call themselves Agile. It's some sort of magic, some form of glitter that you can sprinkle to any environment, and you then just become Agile. So additional confusion is created by equating specific practices as Agile methodology. And I have seen it very, very often. So what I did recently, I wanted to go back and get to the bottom or understand the real meaning of the word agile and word agile, agility as a noun. What do adjectives describe? They provide more information about a noun, such as size, shape, color, and other states of being. And the agility is the ability to move quickly and easily. And on this topic, I found a very interesting talk, very popular, by Dave Thomas, again, one of the co-authors of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, that says that what has happened since the creation of the manifesto is that values have been totally lost behind the implementation. And what people would treat as something that would lead to a successful project, it was to just faithfully follow a prescribed process laid out in great detail in order to build software. So they kept building processes on processes in the name of being or doing agile. About doing, it's about being agile. It's about how fast can you respond to changes. It's about when do you know how much documentation is enough so you can provide the value that your users are expecting from you. And this has had a great impact also on the way most organizations organize their teams. There is this, again, this notion, this idea that the work must be handed over from one team to another until it reaches production. Organizations usually tend to organize different teams into silos. So you have the department for business engineer, department. The way the work in agile software or in the software development has been done for the past so many years, almost since the beginning. So you get the analysis and that you get the plans, and then you build something, and then you test it, and then you deploy it. And we've come to learn this as the waterfall model. And many people today have lots of negative things to say about it. The only difference between what used to, how people used to develop software previously compared to now is that prior to that, it took them 6 months, 1 year, 2 years to go through this process. And now they just shrunk it down in smaller time scales or time frames, but they're still doing the same. And this is what we used to do until we figured out, well, this is not working. So even though we were a great team of people, brilliant minds doing amazing work, we still had this process where we would, one team would prepare the requirements, and then they would hand them over to the team that would build them, and then that was handed over to the team that, or the people that would test them. And then it was deployed to production. What we came to realize is that after doing this for so many sprints and delivering the product to the end users, yes, everything was fine with its quality, but it was not actually fixing the problem the way they expected it would. And on the other hand, the burden of managing the quality of that software was placed only on one person or on one team, which was totally unfair. So we went back and we looked at the way we're developing software and how we can make this more agile, how we can make this more adaptive. And we came up with a process or a way of doing it. Instead of handing over the work from one team to another, treating everybody as a team, and everybody would be able and have the right and be accountable for being involved in researching, building, validating the product. So from doing things the way we used to, or doing things because we were conditioned to believe that this is how it should be done and this is what made us agile, we went to asking ourselves, what is our goal? What are the assumptions we're making? What problem are we trying to solve? How are we going to measure success criteria? What are we not going to solve now and we'll leave it for later? And how can we spread this work so we can deliver minimum value quickly and build on that incrementally? Because it takes a variety of skills and perspectives to solve problems effectively. So nowadays, product owner is not expected to determine what is valuable in isolation. And she's also not expected to know the best way to break down the value into smaller pieces, clearer pieces, and perfectly capture it in writing for everyone's understanding. All team members are customer facing, and we try to encourage and empower real connectivity to the business, so that we have become from a team that was used to handing over the work to a team that is thinking about what are the business problems or the user needs that we're going to solve. So a business-oriented team. And instead of creating separate teams, it's much important to create teams that have a relatively long life and are stable and work on solving specific problems. This was one of the main misconceptions or one of the main ideas, things that I learned over the past year. And I know I will be in a lot of trouble with so many people for saying that, but self-organizing teams are one of the best ways to deliver business value. I credit our self-organizing team as the reason why our productivity didn't drop once we had to lock ourselves up in our homes. And this is because at that point, we had already established trust and transparent communication. We were self-organizing. Team members knew they didn't have to wait for instructions. And it was just a beautiful beautiful thing to be a part of that. So another thing that I understood is that when work is done together in a collaborative manner, it is much more powerful than when it's handed over from one silo to another. And then this leads me to another polarizing topic, something that I've come to realize that it's actually not mandatory, because story points or t-shirt sizes or chocolate bars or whatever relative effort that it's going to take to implement this. But then after going through that so many times and not seeing any real value, I started thinking and pondering, okay, what is an estimate? It's a way of saying what the future will hold, and it comes from the belief that we can predict the future. And we know that there are many people that claim to be able to do that, but and it's almost the same. Companies invest time and money in estimation tools and practices because they expect for managers to come up with budgets and costs. So managers naturally ask the development teams to provide them with estimates, and what do? They give them the estimates. But we tend to overestimate our ability to do anything, to code, to test, to solve problems. What we can estimate is if we've built the Billy bookshelf once, we can estimate how long it will take us to build it the next time. But we cannot estimate how long it will take us to solve a problem we haven't solved before, with a technology we haven't worked with before, in the context we haven't worked before. And the main realization to this came when I watched this video by Linda Rising, which is a renowned author in Agile development, called Deception and Estimation, How We Fool Ourselves. I can share the link later with you if you're interested. It's a very interesting talk. And there she talks about how our estimates are affected by what's called recency, what we can call up in our minds or what is fresh in our brain. And what are we thinking about now has a profound effect on thinking of all kinds and not just estimates. And we will usually overestimate everything. So the only way to achieve estimates that are good enough is to estimate small steps. And how did we go on about solving this? We were talking with a product manager. Okay, so what is the value we're getting from these estimates? I mean, at the end of the day, when the team estimates that something will take X number of story points, they usually equate that to time. And there are some expectations towards how long, in how long you are going to implement something that is 1 story point, estimated at 1 story point, or something that is estimated at 3 story points or whatever. And then they start working on things. So if the expectation is to, or if the estimation was made that this particular problem could be solved in a much shorter time than the developer finds themselves actually working on, then they will start to build technical debt because they need to cut corners, they need to meet the deadline. On the other hand, if this particular problem was estimated at a much greater value or calculation or story point or t-shirt size, but once the team starts working on that, they realize, well, actually, this is not going to take that long, then they will take the whole time that was planned for it and again, over-engineer it. So we said, right, we are not going to do this anymore because it's not helping us bring any value to the end users. What they want is valuable product, not and what we want from the team is to spend their time in doing what they do best and not just assigning random numbers to user stories. And we started breaking things down because we realized that the more flexibility you have and the faster you can deliver values and validate the assumptions, the faster you will learn about what works for your end users and what doesn't. So yeah, no estimates. They're not mandatory. It's fine if you just go on about talking about the problems you're trying to solve, how you're going to break it down into smaller steps, and how you're going to deliver value incrementally and iteratively to the end users. Which leads me to the next idea that many of us, or at least I have had, because what do you do once you have these estimates? You get the chance to create beautiful charts, velocity charts, burn-up charts, burn-down charts. We know all of them. And we equate these charts to productivity and value. So you have spent all that time on estimates. Now you need a tool to justify that. And if things don't go according to plan, because they seldom do, then you will have somebody to point the finger towards at the end of the sprint, for example. And yes, I've been guilty of doing the same, had all the velocity charts I could get, and the burn down charts and the burn up charts and everything in between. But once we delivered the first version to our end users and we got the feedback, which I was expecting it would be great. I mean, it's not that it was bad, it's just that it was not the feedback that I was expecting or any of us was expecting, because we had worked so hard and we had these beautiful velocity charts that were telling us that we're working much better every sprint or every week than we did before. We realized that what we're measuring and out of your and if we need to change something, to respond to change over following a plan, but not as something or as a tool to evaluate anyone's work within the team. So while budgets and schedules still serve a purpose, what I learned is that you need to ensure you're building the right thing. And it's about building software in such a way that you're always in the state of putting that software in production. So charts are not going to help you to do that, but self-organizing teams, collaboration between them and the customers will enable you to do that. And this is how my experience during the past year has taught me what I wish I had known sooner. So no matter how much you plan up front, you will never be able to get it right. And the more you plan, the more assumptions you will build, the more things or software will become unfixable. So instead of planning what might work, experiment, talk to your users, ask yourself what's the most valuable thing you can deliver to them in 2 hours from now, in tomorrow, or next week. And the next lesson I learned is that Agile is not about doing. Agile is a state of being. So don't fool yourself with saying, well, we do daily stand-ups, we are Agile. Or we put some relative-based points to user stories, we are Agile. The third thing that I learned is that most successful teams solve problems together and not in silos. And I have become slightly allergic when hearing the word handover in the context of software development. because that gives me the indication that, oh, well, you are not really agile. You've got a long way to go, but it's okay. You can get there. The fourth thing that I learned is that it's more important to talk about the added value you will bring to the end users and do the work instead of estimating it. And last but not least, let users say whether you've done a good job, and don't associate charts with value.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really great. I just want to take your presentation and give it to like management and just watch this. Now you understand. And I just want to say quickly also to the audience, thank you for your patience. We've had some connectivity issues today, so I'm happy that you sticked through it. But we have some questions for you. First of all, I have a question here. Would it be right to assume that good agile teams and probably prep teams are more resilient in terms of productivity with sudden changes like the pandemic?
Yeah, of course, definitely. As I mentioned, I've noticed that when we had to switch to a completely distributed team, I mean, some of us were getting together in the office in Ljubljana, and the rest of the team was in Sweden. But the next day, when all of us were at our homes, we were able to just continue to do the work. And I think we could be even more productive than we were before. So self-organizing teams, great collaboration, transparency, trust, and this feeling of being able to inspect and adapt as much as possible helped us stay productive.
I have the exact same experience. I mean, when you work from home one day and the rest of the team is still in the same place, it's kind of hard to adapt to being remote. But now when everyone is remote, it's like a completely different thing. It really is.
True.
Another question here. In Scrum methodology, you always estimate stories by complexity and workload and never by time. How does that fit in with time estimates that you were talking about earlier?
So first things first, Scrum is a framework. It's not a methodology. And
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Describes Scrum is a framework, not a methodology. Yes. And Scrum describes practices, not practices, sorry. Scrum describes events, roles, and artifacts and the rules that bind them together. There are many misconceptions about Scrum, but I will not go into detail. And there is nowhere in Scrum that says you need to follow a specific practice. What Scrum advises is the events and roles and the artifacts. And there are different ways of estimating complexity, but the best way we found out is to just try to break it down into the goals we're trying to achieve and the minimum value that we can deliver as soon as possible, and then validate it and get the feedback from the user.
Okay, more questions about estimates here. It's a hot topic. Without estimates, how else can we plan the work? Are there any other methods of quote-unquote sizing work that we can use to determine what the needs and can be done? What work that needs and can be done, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So there is a way to do that, and it's to plan what problem are you going to solve in the next couple of days instead of in the next couple of weeks and months. And it's about allowing teams to talk with one another, allowing teams to say, okay, we believe that this amount of work we can deliver in this amount of time. Just break it down into as small chunks as possible, but don't try to overcomplicate it. Break it down as much as you think you can take on, and then inspect and adapt every day so that you see if your assumptions were right, and if you're able to deliver value as fast as you wanted. So break down into small pieces. Think about what goals you're trying to achieve. Think about how are you going to work on top of, build the work on top of what you are going to build today, but don't get bogged down into hours and other things.
What about when you have dependencies to other teams? Because I understand that they need to know when they can expect some, for example, if we develop an API for someone else that they need, they kind of need to know.
Yeah, that's true. The dependencies are handled in terms of, okay, are we going to be able to deliver this work in the next sprint or sprint after? But we stop planning after that. Not stop planning, but we stop committing to anything after that, because as we saw, situations will change, things will change. People do software and people are unpredictable. So we can always break down to the minimum value we can deliver. We can forecast what is that one API, that one thing we can deliver to you in the following week or 2 weeks, but we are not going to be able to forecast the whole suite or endpoints that you need. We will know that by doing.
True. And through clear communication, as you said, inspect and adapt every day.
Absolutely.
Another question for you. Have you got any tips on how to make managers and clients realize that you don't have a magic crystal ball that can foresee how long time tasks will take with 100% accuracy?
Yeah, this is a difficult topic. It's very important to understand that agile software development can happen in environments where there is a bias towards servant leadership. If you're working in a micromanagement environment, it will be a very difficult thing to explain, because people like to be in control. And these estimates, these numbers, these plans make people feel in control. And this is what micromanagement teams do. They all try to fight for part of the control pie. What I think is super important to be 100% transparent, open, and to try to find solutions together, to not make it a problem of us versus them, but have this attitude that we're all in this together, we're all working towards the same goal. Let's see what we can do with what we have. Let's talk about why are we doing this. Let's plan how are we going to deliver minimum value, but don't try to push people into corners to giving you estimates, because yes, they will give you estimates, but they will probably not be right. And the next time you will review these estimates, you will get even more angry, because once again, they have estimated incorrectly.
True. I guess it's a lot about trust. I mean, trust between team members and trust between the management and clients as well.
Yeah, and it's also about understanding that you're all part of the same team. So whether your title is a product manager or a scrum master or a project manager or a programmer or an engineer of this or that, you're all part of the same team, and you're all here to solve the same problem, and you will do it best by collaborating instead of pointing fingers at one another.
Exactly. Another aspect of this waiting for third parties in some projects, do you have any insights in how to plan for it?
Yeah, I can tell how we try to or attempted to solve that, which is basically being transparent and upfront and telling this other team what you need and try to be as clear as possible. But we failed to plan. I mean, it is normal because situations changed, and even when teams said, well, you're going to have this API or this thing that you need from us by the end of that week, then somebody got sick, or their dependencies changed, or the complexity on their side changed. So it's about being patient and understanding, and yeah, I don't think it's something you can plan. And the majority of issues start when people think that they can plan it, and then that doesn't happen, and everybody's mad at one another. Why you haven't delivered it? You told me you committed to send that yesterday. Well, things have changed. So it's about how able are you to shift your to respond to that change, or to shift your focus from, okay, this is something that we could have done, but okay, now we are instead going to do this and deliver this value to the user, and then we'll come back to it later. At least this is how we try to prioritize the work. Always have two things that you could deliver to two types of values that you could deliver to the end user, and shift the priority depending on which one is safest to do at that point.
Yeah, a lot of interesting question here, but it's starting to get time to wrap up. But I have one last question for you here. Have you found that the tendency to demand estimates, even for artificial deadlines, is sometimes used for purposes other than planning accuracy? For example, creating pressure to be productive.
Yeah, but I don't know anybody who has been successful in doing that. To the contrary, putting pressure on people really messes up with the team morale, and unhappy people produce not very good software. So what you always need to do is make sure that you, as the principles of Agile software development say, build your projects around motivated individuals and enable them to do their work by providing a safe environment and the tools that they need. So putting pressure on people has never worked really well. And but what has worked better is trusting them to get their job done the best way that they know how to do it.
Yeah, that's is a reasonable way to do it. Okay, well, that was all the questions. Thank you once again for teaching us about the Agile myths and for taking the time to answer the questions from the audience. It's been really great to have you here. Before I forget it, I need to know which statement was a lie from you. I have thought about it, and I have guessed, and I think that your lie is that you know 6 languages.
Actually, the lie was that I'm doing a master's in neuroscience. Yeah, I do speak 6 languages to a certain degree, some more fluent than the others. But yeah, I'm not doing a master's in neuroscience. I'm doing a master's in business administration. So
okay.
That was a lie.
But what 6 languages do you know?
So I speak my native language, Albanian, and then I speak Slovenian. I speak a mix of Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, and then French and Dutch. And what was the sixth one?
Swedish?
Yeah, a little bit, but not that well.
Well, that's quite impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, well, as I said, thank you once again, and thank you to the audience who have been here today and listened to us. Next week, we will dig in a bit more to code again. More specifically, we will dig into an introduction to functional programming together with our colleague Johan Olsson. He's a software developer and architect, and he has been programming for a very long time, long before I was born. So I look forward to hearing that introduction to functional programming. So it's the same time and same place next Wednesday at noon, and I hope I will see you then. Bye.
Bye.